Pneumatica, Book 1, by Aaron Welborn and Aaron Knight.
They came to a stop under the canopy of a long-abandoned gas station and killed the engine. They worked together, fastening a mylar blanket around the inside ceiling trim of the vehicle with plastic guitar picks they had collected from their travels. The scene looked like something out of a Midwestern school dance from the 20th century. The faceted reflective surface would be filtered out with a digital overlay that Theron had been busy creating with the help of a custom graphic design virtual intelligence agent during their last 2 weeks on the run. Telisa flicked what appeared to be a small, weathered storage device with her thumb and began to speak. From outside the car, the wind moaned through the creaking metal of the forgotten station, and a whirlwind of parched earth and debris around them picked up, drowning out any noise from within the car. They made it back into Las Cruces before 3, the car now covered in a thick dusting of red clay. Theron had released the transmitter drones over 2 hours ago, each flying a different speed, each on a non-linear path to their drop zone. They were almost clear. Theron made a right on University and headed back out of town. He crossed over a makeshift bridge assembled by makerbots that spanned the chasm left by the last great quake, before the harsh light of day had dipped to the horizon. The remains of Tularosa formed the small community on the other side of the scar, a mile-wide fissure that stretched and cracked the continent from what had been Cape Prince of Wales, Alaska, to the outskirts of Puebla, Mexico. The scar hadn't earned its name due to the image of the miles-deep fissure that tore the North American Union in twain. The land would never heal. That was a fact, but it was not why the chasm was known as the scar. Aside from the people that called the Badlands around it home, everyone else had all but forgotten about it. It had healed over in their minds. It hadn't been erased in augmented reality, but it was like it had been erased from the collective unconscious instead. There was just too much else going on in the world for the survivors of those terrible days to pay them any more energy than had already been stolen from them. It was more of an open wound than a scar, though, Theron thought. A wound that would never heal. Their car silently passed by, boarded up storefronts and barricaded streets, then turned down a narrow alley and followed it quietly out of town. The sun was dying slowly behind rocky outcroppings and a scattered sea of mesquite and brilliant white yucca blooms. Eventually, they came to another rusted metal wall, but this one wasn't half the height of the former border wall. They drove through an open gate, then past fields of salvaged metal and circuit boards that lined the narrow drive leading deeper into the scrapyard. City buses and decommissioned passenger jets had all been repurposed into a growing community in the Badlands. They drove slowly through a labyrinth of towering scrap metal buildings and a hovering web of cables and copper wire. This place was invisible to drones and satellites. Nothing but a quarter-mile of discarded machines and outdated tech scraps. They got plenty of stares from the locals, who openly carried rifles and pistols, some of them even military-grade, but no one seemed threatened. This place was under the protection of Wuya tribe. They pulled up to an old rusted metal garage and got out of the car, their bodies sore from the long ride. The air was cooler here in the shade offered by the mammoth mounds of discarded silicone and precious metals. Puppet greeted them at the gate with 3 of his cousins, all armed to the teeth, wearing armor and ballistic masks painted with bright turquoise, black, white, and red kachina faces on them. Puppet was a little shorter than Theron, and the only one not wearing a mask. His dark, sun-reddened mescalero skin covered in remarkably vibrant ink, his obsidian hair pulled back and braided with turquoise and black straps. Puppet ran things this side of the scar, but he and Theron went way back, shared history. They were amongst friends. Cautious friends, but friends all the same. Theron stepped out, and Puppet rushed him and gave him a bear hug. Puppet's men fanned out, watching the scrapyard for signs of trouble. "Yahate," Puppet said in a low, raspy voice. Puppet greeted Theron with a smile, clapping him on the back. "If I'd have known you were coming, I'd have cooked up something better. Leave the car there. Grab your stuff. Let's get you cleaned up." Telisa stepped out of the car, smiled at Puppet, and walked around to the open trunk. Puppet gave Theron a wide-eyed grin and raised his brow, waiting for an introduction. "I'll tell you inside," Theron said. "We have a lot of catching up to do, brother." Puppet nodded for his men to take care of the car, and they wasted no time. He motioned for Theron and Telisa to follow him into the garage. A beep came from the device on Theron's wrist. He stopped and looked at the modified watch. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away in forgotten, long-dead towns, 3 microdrones dropped their transmitter beacons and continued flying silently, deeper into the desert. The drones would fly for another 2 hours before they deactivated, falling lifelessly into the sand to begin their decomposition cycle. Theron's mind raced, trying to remember if he'd left any trace of where they'd been. He grinned with the poetic philosophy of the thought. If there was no trace, had they really been there at all? What mark had they left on the world with their invisible comings and goings these months past? Feeling a moment of temporary relief, Theron loosened his shoulders. They were safe here, at least as safe as they could be. Theron nodded to himself, then turned and stepped into the ancient sheet metal garage with Puppet leading the way and Telisa by his side.